I was thinking about how some of my most vivid memories from, let's say, childhood or like way earlier in life are dreams that I had. And I remember the dreams better than I remember actual real life events. So,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, it's amazing, like the power of dreams and how they can stick with you and inspire ideas. Because ultimately, when you're consciously writing something, it's just your subconscious flowing through you, hopefully, anyway. So, dreams, I think, kind of let you bypass that filter that normally blocks us from accessing those ideas.
Hey friends, this is my friend Noam, and he is a LA-based filmmaker and also sort of a serial entrepreneur, if you could call it that. He does blogs, newsletters, podcasting, a lot of different things. And I followed him for a couple years now and have taken some of his classes. And one thing about Noam that is really cool is you would call it DIY, like DIY filmmaking, where it seems like you just have this drive to figure it out yourself and not kind of listen to the ways that studios do it. And so I really respect that about you. But I wanted to talk a little bit first about some of your new content coming out. So you have a feature coming out, and you is it two features or one short?
Yeah, so they're both features actually. One is going to be coming out soon, like hopefully in the next few months, and then the other one we haven't shot yet, but we're going to shoot it in August of this year. So that'll come out next year. But yeah, there's a couple features, and I might do a short too if I can, fit it in, I guess, at the end of the year. But we'll see.
Yeah, yeah. So let's start with a little bit about Disappearing Boy. If you could tell me about that and kind of what prompted that concept.
Sure. So this might be relevant, especially to you, to have a bit of backstory on, things like setbacks and all of that, because really this project was born out of probably the biggest setback I've ever had making a film, which was I had another film I'd spent, close to a year writing on and off. And we were already ready to go. I'd cast the film, I had locations, we'd shot like some test footage, and we were just about to begin production. And at the very beginning of production, we lost one of our main locations just due to an issue that none of us could have foreseen. And anyway, long story short, it all sort of fell apart as a result of this location, and all the timing and logistics didn't work. And I had to really kind of assess at that point, okay, do I want to still like pick up the pieces, still make this film and find a way to like just do it? Or if I do that, am I just doing it because I feel like that's what I should do? And I've just put in this much time, but maybe that's actually not the right decision. And so what I did at the time was I'd made the exact opposite decision. I said, you know what, I'm going to leave this as kind of like a lesson learned from this project. I'm going to put it aside. I'm not going to see this through, even though I'm someone that like very much likes to always finish what I start. And I'm a big believer in that. But I also believe sometimes, you shouldn't, if it's the wrong thing, you should recognize when it's time to sort of move on. So anyway, this other project, Disappearing Boy, was essentially born out of that experience. And I wanted to start just making something else right away. So I could continue to make a feature film, get something out there, stay creative. And in order to do it that quickly, I had to completely rethink how I was going to approach filmmaking, which ended up being this huge blessing in disguise. But I ended up, as you might know, just from blogs and things I've shared, but I've essentially broke the film down into shooting blocks of like 1, 2, or 3 days. I would take a month or two off in between, and I was actually writing the film as we went. So I came up with the concept in the first act, and then we shot some of it. And then just, act by act, we would just put this thing together over the course of a year. And I shot it at that way because, first of all, it was easier for me to manage and schedule, easier for me to start right away because the writing was already going to happen in tandem. I didn't have to wait for a year to finish the script or whatever, or even, a few months. But also I could do it with no crew, which was like the most fun part of it for me. It's something I've always wanted to do, is make a movie with no crew. And not that I don't love working with crews, but I'm definitely a jack of all trades, and I like rolling sound and holding a camera and directing actors and trying to juggle it is kind of a fun challenge. So I thought, I'm going to use this opportunity to make this hopefully really unique film. And, separately, I could talk about like what the film is about, but in terms of like why I even made it in the first place, it definitely came out of just not wanting to stop creating and not wanting to, look at a setback as a hurdle, as opposed to an opportunity to kind of do something even hopefully better and more meaningful.
Yeah, so was that the point where you felt like the calling, if you will, to be a filmmaker? Was it at that point where you were like making movies with your friends when you're in high school, or when did it kind of all start for you?
Yeah, it all started like it's funny. Someone else asked me this recently, and I think I almost forgot, but it really all started when I was like 10 and I was watching Jim Carrey movies. I was like 9 or 10 years old, and I watched like Ace Ventura, and he was from Newmarket, Ontario, which is like north of Toronto, where I grew up, and he was like, obviously at the time in like the mid 90s, he was like the biggest star on the planet. He was hilarious. He was like, just such an amazing talent. And I just like, I saw his movies and they just made me laugh so much. And then I realized like, oh, here's this guy that was living in a car, like, with his family that were like, this very poor family that, he had to drop out of school and he was like a janitor and all this stuff. And it ended up being like the biggest star in the world. And I think somehow like something about his story and those movies he was making that were just so funny, like that was kind of when I felt like I want to get into movies. And I thought maybe I wanted to be an actor because I didn't know what directing was. I didn't know what filmmaking was. So I did a bunch of acting, and I just, would jump on the subway and like go downtown and audition for little commercials. And in high school, I did a bunch of like, national commercials and a couple TV movies and things. And that gave me a little bit of a taste of it. But the more I experimented with like acting or anything creative, I just kept coming back to like, I want to make something. It was also that idea of like having control over your destiny, because with a film, like if you make your own film, at first I thought I would just make films so I could act in them. And then I did that once and I realized, oh, I actually like making the film more. And really the acting was a bridge to just get me into like making stuff, because that's really what I want to do, is tell stories.
Yeah.
And yeah, so anyway, so I eventually kind of got to it that way, but there were a lot of moments like there wasn't really one moment where I was like, oh, I'm going to be a filmmaker, because I've constantly doubted it. I've constantly like had ups and downs. And like around those same ages, like I could have been in, so there's like movies like I mentioned, like the early days, like the Jim Carrey movies, but then there were movies like Darren Aronofsky's like Requiem for a Dream, which was one of my first movies I saw, where I was like, oh, this is like stylistically like something that I would want to make. And Memento and all these cool movies that came out at the end of the 90s when I was like just entering high school. Yeah, I mean, those were so influential to me. But even still, like around that time, I remember sitting at home and being like, well, maybe I should just be a musician, like I like music too, or maybe I should just like, I don't know, like I just start some other business, or like go into psychology, which I thought about so many things. So there was never like one moment where I was like, I have to be a filmmaker. I just always sort of wanted to be, and I kept coming back to it, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I love that. I think there's so many different ways that people come up upon their dream. And so often
Yeah.
we think of the traditional way of like, oh, like light shining from heaven. This is what I'm supposed to be. And it's not always like that. I like that. It's just something that just kept coming back to you. So I that's really neat. So
Yeah.
tell me about from there, because I know you grew up in Canada and then you made the move to LA.
Yeah.
Tell me about one of your biggest setbacks. I mean, we talked about the setback in the film, but were there any like personal or financial or just something where you're
Yeah.
like, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like the big setback for me from day one was always like, I knew since I was a kid, I wanted to move here. I loved, like, I would see LA and on TV and shows, and I was like, oh, this is like, I got to get down there. Like, it looks so cool, but I'm from Canada. I'm not a US citizen. Now I am, but that took 10 years basically to get. So like at the time I was, graduating high school, and in my mind, I thought like, okay, I'm gonna go to school, like I'll go to UCLA, and like that'll get me a foothold. And it just wasn't feasible, because as an international student, with like, I would never have gotten a scholarship. I didn't even apply to those schools because it would have been hundreds of thousands of dollars and it wouldn't have made sense. So I decided, okay, I'll stay here for a few years. I'll do my like education in Toronto and then I'll go. But then it was like setback after setback in terms of just moving here. And like the majority of my 20s of my life was spent just trying to get a visa to like move here. So like first I tried to like I said, I was going to go to university here and then I didn't. So I did it in Canada. That takes me up to like age 22, 23. Then I tried to come down here and just move with, I can't remember what type of visa it was, probably like an O1, but before I would have qualified, which is an artist visa. And I met with a lawyer and he's just like, oh, you'll never get this visa. And I remember at that point, I'm like, am I just like never going to get to move because I can't work there? It's like if I was just born an hour away from Toronto in Buffalo, like I could just move there, but like it just didn't make any sense to me. It was so frustrating. So eventually, like I never like didn't have that dream. I just had to keep figuring out another way. So I was like, okay, I can't do it that way. What do I do? And then eventually I came down here. I got a student visa to go to like Santa Monica Community College just for a few months, which was like practically nothing, to pay for. It was just so I had an excuse to like legally be here and meet people. And I wasn't sustainable, so I had to go back to Toronto. But then that made me realize, like, okay, like I'm a step closer. So then I met a lawyer, not to like do the whole, experience, but then I met with like a lawyer, and he said, "Look, you can do this, but here are the things you have to do." And he gave me this whole list of like a lot of stuff I had to accomplish in order to basically sponsor myself to move here. And I just spent like 2-3 years doing every single thing on that list. And then I got the visa and moved here. And then I got a green card and now citizenship. But like that experience of just trying to move here, even from Canada. So like I really feel for people who are from like another country overseas or wherever. Like it's just insanely hard, even for a Canadian to move here.
Yeah, and I think your work speaks of that. I always find your blogs like inspirational, and like we all have our own stories and our own paths and our own timeline. Because I think, especially for like younger people, it's like we hear about the Spielbergs who were like directing at 25, and we're like, I'm behind, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And so I just love that your view is like to take the pressure off of that and like let your journey be its own thing. So
yeah,
can you tell me about like what you're doing now and what your films look like now, and kind
yeah.
of how you're living the dream?
Totally. Well, I guess I'm just trying to do something different with every film and everything I do. I just want to experiment and try and fail and get better and find things that work. And like, so I've made these, now 3 micro budget films. 2 of them were very much like features. I mean, 2 of them were very much like done in a similar vein, with a crew. I did the 3rd one with no crew. Now I'm doing this 4th movie, which is called Teacher's Pet, and it's going to have, it does have an investor. It has a financier also on board, or sorry, a distributor also on board. So it's being in some ways treated like a more traditional film. We might get name cast in it and that sort of thing if we're able to. But at the same time, I'm trying to take a lot of the lessons from the last movie and make sure that I'm applying them to wherever applicable to this one, just so things don't get wasteful. And so we're really making the most of our time on set, and we're not just bloating the crew with people that don't necessarily need to be there, and we're focusing our resources in the best ways. So it's definitely going to be different from the last film, but I think something I'm really thinking about a lot lately is I don't want to ever have a like one formula for how I do anything, like make a film or whatever. I want to find principles that work and carry those forward, but I still want to build on those from film to film. So I think in this one, the challenge is going to be to scale things up a little bit more than I have in the past, work with a bigger team, but still kind of find ways to bring that like no budget ingenuity into the process. So that'll be a challenge, but you know, it should be fun. And the movie itself is going to be like, I think, really cool because we do have some amazing locations, resources, and talent already on board. So if people are interested, they can, you know, keep an eye out. I'll probably post some updates once we have a release date for the movie. There's a couple festivals we're looking at maybe doing a premiere at, and then once that's done, we'll start, you know, releasing the film. So yeah, I mean, people can always check in on my blog or newsletter, noamkroll.com/newsletter, and then, you know, I'll send some updates.